Kia ora katoa, ko Renee aho. Welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Like Grant said, last but not least, thank you very much for making the time and joining the session. So my name's Renee. I'm the recruitment lead for our early and careers opportunities here at MFAT. So we're going to try and keep this session short and sweet and allow plenty of time at the end for all your questions. So I'm not going to be doing a lot of talking. I'm going to hand you over to my lovely colleagues. I've got Talia and Daniel that's standing by, and I'll hand you over to them and they'll introduce themselves and we'll get cracking with the presentation as well. So I'll just ask Daniel and Talia just to ask you when to move the slides across, Grant, if that's okay.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Renee. Kia ora koutou katoa. Ko Daniel tōku ingoa. Kia ora, everybody. My name is Daniel, and a huge thanks to everyone at Possible for having us today, and to everyone who's come to listen to our kōrero. Just a little bit about what I do here at MFAT. So I've been at MFAT for just over a year now. I work in our Pacific, Polynesia and French Pacific team, specifically working on New Zealand's relationship with Tuvalu. So that's a foreign policy and international development focused role. But there is a huge range of roles at MFAT that we'll talk about, but I'll pass over to Talia to introduce herself.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. Kia ora koutou, te lawhalawa, aloha ingoa o Talia. So my name's Talia, and I started with the ministry this year, actually, in a very similar role to Daniel. So I'm sitting on the Kiribati and Vanuatu desks, managing bilateral relationships and also several international development projects. And I actually came into the ministry through an internship pathway, through the Tuputai internship, and I interned last summer in the corporate legal unit. So a very different role to the ministry's policy roles, but we can talk a little bit about all the different opportunities that the ministry has. So yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much for giving up your time to listen to our spiel about MFAT and try and reel you in. I'll pass back over to Daniel to start off the slides.
Kapai, thanks, Talia. And just to say, I also came in through MFAT through our Audit internship program. So more than happy to chat about that later. But let's get into the presentation. Can we go to the next slide? Thank you. I can't actually see myself on the screen because I'm on the phone, so hope it's all good. But what do we do here at MFAT? So our overall purpose, as you see on the screen, is that the ministry acts in the world to build a safer, more prosperous and more sustainable future for New Zealanders. Ki hāngai ake te manatū he ao haumaru, ao tōnui, ao pūmau, ki te oranga tonutanga mō Aotearoa whānui. So that is our purpose here at MFAT, but what does that actually mean? And what does that look like in practice? So if we can head to the next slide, we'll start to look at that. Awesome. So I'll just spend 2 seconds on this slide. This is our strategic framework. It's probably a bit small on your screens and you won't be able to see all the different things that does, but I highly recommend you go onto our MFAT website where you can look at that in greater depth. But essentially what that does is it sets out how we do the work that we do and also what it is that we do. And those blue diamonds in the middle, they set out our sort of priority areas for MFAT. But again, won't talk you through that. Feel free to have a look on our website for that one. If we could just head to the next slide, thanks. Great, so starting off, what does MFAT look like around the world? So we have our base here in the HSBC building in Wellington, but we also have 60 posts around the world in over 50 countries. So that's high commissions, embassies, consulates, all of those posts around the world. We don't have one in every country, but most of our posts cover multiple countries as well. So for example, I know that our posts in Mexico covers multiple different countries around that region. That's just an example. And when you work at MFAT, you get a couple of years experience here in Wellington. to sort of build a base, a foundational understanding of what it is that MFAT does, and then you'll get the opportunity to go over on a posting to actually represent New Zealand in one of those posts overseas. So really exciting opportunity. Another piece of work that we do, a huge element of MFAT. Yep, that just to that next slide, thanks. Is our trade work. So that is negotiating and defending market access, looking for greater opportunities for New Zealand businesses overseas, strengthening opportunities for Māori businesses and the Māori economy, and essentially just negotiating our international trade relationships. You might have seen the UK-New Zealand Free Trade Agreement recently signed. So we have a whole section at MFAT that led that work. So that's one aspect of what we do. Next slide, please. Climate change and looking at the environment and how international relationships impact our environmental work is a huge part of MFAT as well. That comes in say, for example, both Talia and I's work here in the Pacific and Development Group. So we have a strong focus on strengthening climate resilience in the Pacific, but this is also looking at agreements like the Paris Agreement. How do we ensure that we're meeting our obligations under the Sustainable Development Goals, that sort of thing. It's another really exciting element of MFAT. Next slide, please. So I've touched on this already. Both Talia and I work in development roles. So that's essentially administering and managing where the New Zealand aid program funding goes. So for example, I work on the Tuvalu desk, which means we have a number of climate change projects, a number of economic resilience projects, where we work directly with the government of Tuvalu to ensure that our funding is going towards areas that are impactful for the people of Tuvalu. So that's one element of our development work. Next slide. Cool. So we also have another section of MFAT that works in our sort of multilateral agreement space and multilateral organization space. So that's things like the UN, the Commonwealth, different agreements and treaties and that sort of thing that we work in. There's a lot of legal work in there as well. But a huge part of what we do is advocating for New Zealand's position. What does New Zealand think about a certain issue? What is New Zealand going to do about a certain issue? We often have the privilege and the opportunity to be that voice. Next slide, please. What have we got here? Sorry, just seeing that. So another part of our development work that we do is working with countries across the world, but in particular in the Pacific, to essentially partner on areas where we can mutually learn from one another and where we can benefit from one another's skills and experiences. So that's another really important piece of what we do in the development space. Next slide. Apologies for the many slides. A really key piece of MFAT's work is our humanitarian crises response. So in response to a crisis, we stand up what we call the Emergency Coordination Centre. And within that, staff are taken from their day-to-day role and they put their entire full-time working time into targeting this response and into working on the response. So, for example, recently we had, of course, there was the eruption in Tonga. So we had an ECC and a coordination centre to respond to that and to provide humanitarian assistance there. Right now, we have one set up for the crisis in Ukraine. So these happen very regularly and is a really regular and really impactful part of what MFAT does. Next slide, please. So I've touched on that one before in the same way that we did to support the Tonga response. Next slide. I think this is the final slide. So we provide consular services. So this, I think, is probably what MFAT is maybe most known for or most visible. around the world. So, for example, if you're traveling overseas, you lose your passport, you might go to the New Zealand High Commission or the New Zealand Embassy for a bit of advice on what to do there. If there are New Zealanders who maybe get into any sorts of legal trouble, we can also support that person to access legal advice and legal support that they need. And also, as mentioned, for example, with crises like those happening in Ukraine at the moment, a huge part of our job is identifying, are there New Zealanders over in Ukraine or wherever the crisis may be? And then what sort of support do they need and how can we deliver that? I think that's the final slide there. I might move to the next slide if that's okay. Thank you. I just wanted to, before I pass to Talia, because I've been talking for too long, as I knew I would, to quickly talk about our values. So these are really important to the way that we conduct ourselves as staff, both in MFAT, but also how we want to portray and be as a country on the international stage. So our 4 values are kotahitanga, drawing strength from our diversity and working together as one. Manaakitanga, we honor and respect others. I think that's self-explanatory, but a really, really key, essential part of what we do. Courage, we do the right thing. And also what I often say is, as a small country, it can be daunting to stand up there and put our voice and our perspective out there in the world, but it takes courage to do that. And we're encouraged to do that. And finally, impact. So everything we do at MFAT has that sort of underpinning goal of creating impact, positive impact for New Zealanders and for our international neighbours as well. So that's a very quick overview of what MFAT does and how we do it. And I'm now going to pass over to Talia, who I think is going to speak us through the application process. Kia ora, Talia.
Kia ora, Daniel. Thank you so much. And apologies in advance. I've been getting your connection is unstable, little notifications. So apologies if I cut out a little bit. If we could please move to the next slide. So I'm going to cover basically what to expect from MFAT when you join as a graduate, if you come on board, the kind of development opportunities that we offer you in the ministry, and also I'm going to be talking about the internship pathways. I noticed that we had a question about that in the Q&A, so I'll cover that. I also noticed another question in the Q&A about length of postings and language training, so I can cover that also in my section. So yeah, basically when you come on board the ministry, there's what we call the Foundations program. So which takes you from February to February. So I've just started. So I'm still in the Foundations program and I'll finish up the Foundations program in February 23. And basically this is a year-long program that offers you a whole lot of different workshops on specific areas. So even if, for example, you come into the ministry with no background in international law, there'll be a specific workshop on international law. Or a specific workshop on Maturanga Māori. And so those are really awesome development opportunities. And you get to learn basically how MFAT does foreign policy in the world and really develop your skills. There's also in-house career advisory services to help you sort of figure out, out of all the many different career pathways you could go on MFAT, you could go an international law route, you could go a development route, you could go the diplomatic track. There's services there to help you decide. Once you've finished that 12-month program is when you can start applying for postings overseas. So as Daniel mentioned, we have several posts all over the world, and I think it's about 60 different locations. And so basically it's sort of like an internal review process. You put your name forward and you might get selected, or you might have to put your name in again. And usually your first posting is about 2 to 3 years long, or you could go on relief assignments. So you could be posted somewhere, anywhere from 3 to 6 months. And MFAT does also provide language training for particular posts. So I believe, and Daniel, Renee, feel free to correct me on this, but if you're going somewhere in the Middle East, if you're going across North Asia countries, so China and Korea, and some other European countries. I think they will provide up to a year to 2 years of language training for you to go on posting, which is really awesome, unique opportunity. And of course, you've got a great cohort of graduates to grow alongside you, as the slide says. So yeah, there's a real sense of camaraderie of we're all in this together among the cohort. And there's also some great staff networks to support you. So I'm part of the Vaka Pacifica staff network, and they host different events just to kind of, you know, give you wraparound support. If we can move to the next slide. So yes, the application process. And I'll address this, and then I'll address the different internship pathways, because this application process is mainly for our graduate recruitment. So applications close very soon, in 2 days. And all you need at this first stage of the application process is a CV and an unofficial transcript from university. So that doesn't, so for me, I just downloaded a PDF version of my transcript on my university page. And there's also an online application form that you need to fill in, which will prompt you with several different questions. And they're usually just a few sentence answers. The second stage, which is throughout April, is cognitive testing, video introduction, and a written exercise. The written exercise will usually be, will definitely be some sort of policy related question, but don't fret too much about that if you don't have a background in foreign policy or anything. It's really just to see how you think, how you work through issues. A good tip would be to go up and just Google online policy briefs and see how they're usually set out, and kind of loosely try and follow that structure. And then once you go through that process in late April, there's a panel interview, which is when you're actually going to sit in front of 2 to 3 people from MFAT and just have a bit of a chat. You'll definitely be asked why you want to work at MFAT, and you might be asked what the most important issues are facing New Zealand's foreign policy. So yeah, but at every stage of that very lengthy process, it can seem intimidating or daunting, but there is very clear instructions. I found the process very, very clear, very easy to follow, and you can always email graduate recruitment at mfat.gov.nz. If someone could pop that email in the chat, that'd be great if you have any questions about any of that process. And finally, just on internships are a really great pathway into the ministry, sort of a try before you buy thing. So I did the Tubutai internship, which is for Pacifica. There's also the Aorere internship for Māori, the government health and safety internship for people particularly interested in health and safety, the government legal network internship, and our own internal Vaka Pacifica internship, another internship pathway for Pacifica. And if you have any questions about those internship pathways, you can look online at our internships page, or again email graduate recruitment at mfat.gov.nz. But that's all for my side of the spiel. I hope I didn't go on too long. I'll pass back to Renee now for some questions.
Thank you, Talia. Thank you, Daniel. Great job. So I know we've been keeping an eye on the kind of Q&As in the box over there. I don't know if there's any last minute questions. Conscious of time, I don't know if we can run a bit over if there are more questions coming through. So there's nothing at the moment. Just wanted to highlight one question that came through just around kind of requirements. So to be eligible for our policy officer graduate opportunities, we do require applicants to hold New Zealand citizenship or at least be in the process, submitted an application to DIA and in the process of obtaining their citizenship. And the reason is for that is that we need our policy officers to be able to obtain a diplomatic passport. And also we do require people to hold national security clearances and also be able to maintain that. So typically, I mean, myself, I've got a confidential level clearance, and that means that I would need to have a 10-year kind of checkable work history or background check, being able to complete it. It is a bit easier when you've, been living and working in one of the Five Eyes. But yeah, there's just a bit of complexity around that side of things. So hoping that that's cleared up your question, Fadi. There are no questions in the Q&A, but kind of just had a couple of questions for you, Daniel, if you don't mind, if I kind of put you on the spot there. What would you say is a kind of common myth or a kind of, or perception about MFAT and the type of people that we're looking for?
That's a very good question, because I think that links in well to the slide that's on the presentation now. Thanks, Renee. A myth about MFAT that I discovered when I was an intern was that everyone thought you had to have a law degree. Everyone thought you had to have a master's degree. Everyone thought that you had to have straight A's, which, I can understand how people would have been daunted to think that you had to have all of those things. But I would just like to highlight very strongly that that is not the case. We now have a bachelor's degree requirement, so you don't need a master's or anything above an undergraduate bachelor's level. There's no grade requirement, so don't worry if you don't have straight A's. It's absolutely not about that. That's a question I get asked a lot. And you also, your degree does not have to be in law. It can be from literally any discipline. I studied a Bachelor of Arts majoring in Japanese and Spanish, so that is nothing to do with law, and still managed to get in. So I would like to just highlight that. A really key thing that I think you should have in mind if you're thinking of applying is that we want to know what it is in your life and your life experience that makes you you. Whether that's having lived in another country, whether that's having lived navigating multiple cultures, whether you speak multiple languages, whether you have been a community leader in your church or a sports team, whether you have leadership experience, volunteer experience, that sort of thing, is the kind of people that we're looking for, people with a diverse range of life experience. So it does not come down to whether you've got an A+ on your degree and all that sort of thing. That's not the most important thing that we're looking for. We're looking for well-rounded people who've had a diverse range of experiences. So really highlight that on your application, I would say.
Perfect. Thanks, Daniel. Anything that you wanted to add, Talia, or?
Yeah, I'd just re-emphasize Daniel's point that there's a really diverse bunch of people, at least in my cohort at the ministry. I do kind of tick that box of, I did law, and but I think that what's really cool about my cohort is there's such a variety of people. There's people who did fine arts degrees, there's people with all sorts of experience, and in my interview experience, I wasn't asked a single question about law or international law. They were more interested in my experience volunteering at church. So yeah, and MFAT's a really cool place to work. The opportunities to travel are amazing. I know that travel has been put on the back burner over the past few years. A lot of us missed out on our OE, so this is a really great opportunity to kind of travel with work. Thanks, Renee.
Awesome, thank you. Maybe just a last kind of question before we wrap up, if that's okay, Team Prosper, is I'd really like to hear from both Daniel and Talia. What surprised you the most when you started with MFAT? Maybe who wants to go first? You, Daniel? There you go.
Thanks, Renee. The thing that surprised me the most, I would say, the breadth and the there's just hugely broad range of stuff that you do at MFAT. I'm still, after a year of working here, discovering things that MFAT does and that MFAT works on. As I said, I work in a development role, specifically at the government of, working with the government of Tuvalu. But with that, I've been able to work on trade issues. I've been able to work on climate change, some UN-related issues, COVID-19, vaccines, pandemic planning, working with colleagues in Australia. You really don't know the sort of doors that it opens. Having a role here, even though your portfolio might be quite specific, you will end up working across a huge range of different pieces of work. So as I say, I'm still surprised every day about the different things that my colleagues are doing and are working on. So I would say it would just be the diversity of work that we do here at MFAT.
Yeah, I don't want to copy and paste too much, but yeah, I'd like to piggyback off what Daniel said, the breadth of work and just how involved New Zealand is specifically in the Pacific. I got a taster of it doing foreign policy at uni, but you really just don't know until you're in the middle of it, how involved we are, how many projects we are involved in, and the kind of projects are really meaningful. They're things that really make a difference, not only just to the lives of New Zealanders and sort of that high level improving bilateral relationships way, but really practical differences for people in the Pacific. And there's so many different pathways within the ministry as well. You can kind of have a new career every 2 or 3 years if you want to here. So yeah, thanks for that great answer, Daniel. I just completely stole it.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much, Grant and team, for hosting us this afternoon. It's been a great session, and thanks Talia and Danielle for doing all the talking, and I couldn't have done it without the two of you, so thank you very much. And yeah, thank you to everybody that joined us online as well.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks so much everyone.